Bill Cohn is an American lawyer from Stanford. He moved to Prague, where he taught a critical thinking course at my high school. We talk about his activism, American militarism, apartheid in South Africa, and much more. The episode was supposed to be recorded in a library, but because of the pandemic, the library's access was restricted to students only. So we decided to record it on the ground in the library's entrance hall. For this reason, the quality of the audio recording is lower than usually. We were also interrupted by a security guard right before the end, so the recording ends somewhat abruptly. I hope you enjoy this episode regardless. And we are recording.
Hi.
It's great to have you, Bill. I'm very glad
Nice to see you again.
Could make this happen. How are you?
You lost some hair since the last time I saw you.
I did?
Yeah.
Oh, that's because I'm nervous about the situation in the world right now.
Understandable.
Yeah. There's a lot of misinformation going around. Not enough people took your critical thinking class.
I don't know that it would help these days. My concern is that it's not about individual intentions or rationality, but rather that the systems, the institutions have distorted everything. That
What kind of institutions? The big tech?
Big tech, corrupt government, and supplicant judicial systems beholden to the politicos. I don't want to get into grand conspiracy theory, but let's start with something good, okay?
Okay.
They released a vaccine yesterday.
Oh, did they?
That's unpatented and effective, and it's going to be distributed in India and Southern Africa. And what's going on, man?
Sorry, I took a picture of you.
No, that's cool.
Sorry.
Let me see it before you post it.
I will, of course.
Because sometimes I have a bad hair day.
Absolutely.
So that's about the best thing I've heard in a while, that they have
Unpatented vaccine? Like an open source vaccine?
Yeah, it's unpatented, and it was produced by the University of Houston Children's Hospital, or University of Texas Children's Hospital, with the express aim to get it distributed to the world. I mean, one of the things that I find bizarre is, who do you know you can have some trust in what they say. And it seems to me that for the past 21 months that the pandemic's been going on, the head of the WHO is the obvious person that we should turn to. And he's been consistent in principle throughout, talking about the gravity of the situation and the need for vaccine equity. But nobody wanted to listen.
He was also very consistent in calling Taiwan part of China.
And calling what?
Taiwan part of China?
Well, nobody's perfect.
Yeah, well, it's
really. What does that have to do with? So you're saying that he's like doing the bidding of China? And
oh yeah,
WHO.
absolutely.
Like I say, nobody's perfect.
Of course.
But what are the two questions? Is he qualified? Well, he's qualified not in global politics, but he's qualified in public health. And is he basically unbiased? You question that. I think relative to other actors, he's relatively unbiased.
I see. So, let's talk about your activism.
Good, activism, yeah. I've been thinking about activism. I'm glad you raised that. What do you start? Oh, sorry.
Start with what? Asking questions?
Yeah. What interests you?
How did you get into it? How old were you when you first kind of went onto that path of, being politically active?
Yeah.
What motivated you, and what do you even feel?
My activism started when I was early in high school, and the U.S. was waging war in El Salvador and Nicaragua and Honduras. And I got involved in fighting U.S. militarism in Central America. And it was catalyzed by a photography teacher I had who was very political. And so he got us thinking about the world and engaged in protest activities. And then, of course, they implemented the draft and registration for the draft. That makes it personal. I think that the draft is a good thing because it makes everybody have a stake in foreign policy.
Oh, I see. Yeah. Americans, they actually like to use that draft of theirs. They used it during Vietnam War, right?
Was
did. That the last time? Did they use it during Korean War?
That's the last time. They learned... Well, no, they actually implemented draft registration, but they didn't need to follow up on the registration with an actual draft around their wars in Central America.
Yeah, but draft registration, that's like perpetual, right? That's not only during war. You need to, in the US, you need to register for draft when you're 18, right? At least that's what I heard. It's like
it's all legislative. If there's an act of Congress which requires young people to register for the draft because they're getting ready to mobilize for a military action, then you have to. But that's the last time they've used the draft. Now everything is done. It's an economic draft. The poor fight wars. And increasingly wars are being outsourced to mercenary private contractor operations. And so the democratic check against unnecessary warfare is lost when you don't have a draft, because when people are sending their sons and maybe their daughters too to fight a war, then they start to question that war. But out of mind, out of sight, out of mind. If it doesn't concern their blood and people in their community, they don't really care that much. They choose just to look the other way and trust their government.
What do you think about people who view the American military as the police force of the world? And maybe you find it as something ridiculous, but not only have I met a lot of people who think that way, but actually I also sometimes do feel a bit like the American army is keeping the world a bit in check, right? Like I'm glad that the American military is so strong, because I think that it prevents Russia and China from maybe doing some stuff. So, what's your feelings about that?
Well, given the fact that the U.S. spends far more than any other country, the second largest spender on military is China, and the U.S. spends more than 3 times the amount that China does on its military. It's clearly the leading fighting force in the world. And, get comfortable.
Don't worry about it.
Since you can't see us, we're sitting on the floor here trying to make ourselves comfortable, which is kind of nice. Mickey, what we see depends upon where we stand, or where we sit in this case. And so it's like, the Czech Republic sees U.S. as somehow a good force because the U.S. has been helpful in your history. But people of Asia and Africa and South and Central America certainly don't see U.S. as the world's policeman as a good thing, because it leads to bombing campaigns, propping up corrupted governments, training military to torture and imprison their own people. I mean, Chile is the prime example.
Oh, do you think they were trained to do that? Because I was aware that it happened, but I didn't know that there was I thought it was... The idea they were trying to sell was that it was like a few bad apples, right? It's like...
What bad apples?
Like the people who did the torture in the military.
Guantanamo Bay. That's.
No, I'm talking about if you look at the case studies of the Dominican Republic, Honduras, El Salvador, Chile, Indonesia, and you look at the history of U.S. The Congo. It's well documented that the CIA and U.S. resources of the military were used to train local security forces, police and military, to torture and imprison their own people for the sake of propping up authoritarian, corrupted governments to serve the interests of U.S. business.
I see. And so you were realizing all this and decided that you needed to fight against it.
Well, I don't know. I realized it all at once. Life is a learning process. And so you read, you investigate, and you try to understand things better. I realized that there were gross human rights violations happening in El Salvador, Nicaragua, and Honduras, and that I was being asked to help in that process, not only by paying taxes and being a citizen, but also by registering for a draft. And so, that got me started in politics and activism. And then when I got to university, I got heavily involved in the anti-apartheid movement.
Anti-what?
Do you know what apartheid is?
Probably not.
Okay. Apartheid was the system of lawful enslavement of the majority people of South Africa. According to the laws of the apartheid state, which means separate between races, only white people could own land. Black people, who were 87% of the population of South Africa, needed a pass from an employer in order to be able to come into the industrial centers in order to keep them as a labor reserve. And of course, they couldn't vote. And so...
And this is not still the case, is it?
What's that?
This isn't still the case, is it?
No. So the history is...
when did it end?
Well, it's a long process of struggle. In 1960, there was a Sharpeville massacre when blacks were protesting against the pass laws, and they were shot in the back. And so this was published to the world through photographs and film of the white South African police force shooting blacks in the back for peaceful protest. In 1976, it was the students in South Africa, the black students, who led the uprising with their protesting Afrikaans being declared the official language in the public schools. And so, the language of the oppressor, language is the basis of all understanding, and they felt, you can't teach us in the language of the people who are occupying our country and denying us our rights.
I see.
And so there was a shooting of Hector Peterson, the first person killed in the Soweto uprising. These were unarmed school children who were being shot by the white South African police forces. These images shocked the world, and so it led to the cultural and economic boycott of South Africa. And so I got involved in the anti-apartheid movement when I was at Stanford. And that was in 1983, 84, and 85. The economic sanctions legislation was passed in 1985. Nelson Mandela was elected, was freed from prison in the late 1980s, and around 1990, he was elected the first democratically elected president of the Free South Africa.
I see. Okay, so...
But on that note, it's never as simple as it seems, because I want to pay homage to Archbishop Desmond Tutu, who died at the age of 90 this week because he was very critical. He's been a voice of dignity and humanity for all people of the world in his 90 years on Earth. And he was very critical of the black government that took over for their acting in their own interest rather than the promises they made to the people who voted for them. And so this is important when you look at a country to always distinguish between the interests of its people and its state or government.
I see. So what exactly was your role in this movement?
Well, I spent half a year doing field research in South Africa for my thesis. And so I developed a lot of contacts with people.
What was your thesis?
It was called The History of Labor Migration in Southern Africa and Apartheid South Africa Case Study. And it looked at the history of the way in which laborers were pulled in from the nominally independent states around South Africa. We're talking about Botswana, Zimbabwe, Swaziland, Mozambique, and Southwest Africa, now Namibia. And so it looked at the way in which law and power were used in order to enslave the blacks to work in the gold and silver mines. And so it culminated in a case study in the Western Cape. And anyway, so you asked about my role. Based on that experience and my contacts in South Africa, I was involved in SASA, the South African Students Association, which then morphed and aligned with SOSA, the Stanford out of South Africa divestment movement, in order to put pressure on the administration to sell all its interests in companies that were profiting from slavery in South Africa. And so we had sit-ins and teach-ins. We got arrested sitting in front of the bursar's office to prevent students from being able to pay their fees until the university agreed to sell its holdings in companies doing business in South Africa. This is similar to the divestment movement happening with fossil fuel companies at campuses today. Mm-hmm. It's saying, put your money where your mouth is. It's easy to talk about freedom and democracy, but if you're profiting from oppression and minority rule and slavery, essentially, then you're a hypocrite. And so that was the genesis of it. We had success, ultimately, in forcing the board of directors to sell their interests in South African companies. But in order to get there, they sent us to Capitol Hill with the message that if you really want to bring about change in South Africa, you need to focus on foreign policy and go to Congress and work with them. So they gave us money to go to Congress.
Like the school gave your organization the money?
They gave me personally money in the name of an organization that I started to take a group of 5 students with me to Washington, D.C. in the summer of 1985.
And at this time you were a PhD candidate? Or?
No. I was just an overeducated loudmouth undergraduate.
Okay.
So they figured they could pay me off to shut me up.
Okay.
Like, okay, here, Cohn, take this money, go to Capitol Hill, and come back and tell everybody that divestment isn't the way to bring about change, that it's actually economic sanctions on the part of the national government. And of course, I came back and said exactly what I was told by the leaders in Congress. I'm talking about people like Ron Dellums and Alan Cranston, our Californian senator and representative. They all said, if you want to help to bring down apartheid, keep doing what you're doing. The only reason why we're discussing economic sanctions legislation is because of what is going on in the campuses throughout the country. you've put the political pressure on Congress to act because you are the sons and daughters of the affluent class who are getting arrested and raising hell about this. And so, of course, President Donald Kennedy of Stanford was none too thrilled at the articles that I wrote upon my return. But it's like, what's true is true. And it was clear that A led to B. And without the action on the campuses, Congress wouldn't even be discussing imposing sanctions on South Africa. And finally, in 1986, they imposed the sanctions. And that's when the Anglo-American corporation that runs the gold and silver mines in South Africa put pressure on the white-led government of Picabota to enter into negotiations with the African National Congress for a transition. This is where capitalism is more enlightened than political interests because they have a long-term interest in preserving the stability of the country, and so on and so forth. So anyway, when I was in Washington, D.C., I got arrested again as part of the Free South Africa movement that was started by Randall Robinson and Roger Wilkins. Every day for a period of months, they had high-profile people, celebrities, politicians, and regular folk walk up to the entrance to the South African embassy and refuse to move so that they couldn't do business in issuing passports and all the other business that takes place at an embassy, and the police would come and arrest you. So I was part of that process. And so here's where we come to my concern about activism today. Direct action, people on the streets, focuses sustained attention and gets media attention and public awareness in the way that I'm concerned digital activism doesn't. Digital activism is good at connecting people, but when you're putting your name on a digital demand or statement or
Change.org.
Huh?
Change.org. They started a lot of online petitions.
Yeah, online petitions. What's the end game on that?
Yeah, it doesn't hold the same amount of power, does it?
It doesn't have potency. It doesn't command the attention of people who aren't already interested in it. And so, you know, I don't know where to go with this. I've been thinking a lot about the ideals of agency versus determinism or fatalism, if you will, as we deal with the pandemic, as we deal with ecological collapse, as we deal with rampant militarism and all the other challenges going on. We all want to think that we can make a difference through our acting on our values. And I'm just concerned that we're all atomized by the digital world, that we've talked about the filter bubble, that people are preaching to the choir, and that we can't really command attention for action on things. I watched last night the film, what's it called? Don't Look Up.
Yeah.
Have you seen it?
I have.
Huh?
I have, yes.
Good. Tell me your reaction to it.
It wasn't bad, but I liked how it reflected our society and how no matter the issue, people are gonna split over it, and there's gonna be the side you're part of, which is absolutely the sane one, right? Of course, the people with brains is what everyone thinks, and then there is the other side, who are people who are absolutely mistaken, the delusional ones, the one manipulated by the media. And those are always the others, you know? You're never part of the group who's manipulated by the media, no matter what you think. It's always the others. You know what I mean?
Well, yeah, but I'll disagree with you somewhat. I think we're all manipulated all the time. Like, if we think we're too smart and we're somehow impervious because we're educated or read a lot to manipulation, that's arrogant. I think everybody's manipulated all the time. And so I don't know where to go with this, but in your speaking about it, you're reflecting one of the ways in which I think you're manipulated, Mickey. That is saying divided, and our group and their group, and the people who know and the people who don't know. And that is polarization. And I think that this is part of what the digital information ecosystem has done to us, and the political class that acts in alliance with the tech giants and the military forces that profit from a divided society and a divided world. Let me just share with you a word that Desmond Tutu used a lot in his lifetime of trying to unify human beings to respect the dignity of all human beings and improve the situation of all humanity. It's an African word, Ubuntu. Ubuntu means to recognize the essence of what it means to be human, and to be strong in furtherance of that, not to lose sight of what it means to be human. And he said that to be human means to recognize our shared humanity, that we have no humanity unless we recognize the humanity of the people in our community and in our world. It's ultimately a message of love. And in order to keep your humanity, you need to be strong, because there are so many things that try to dissuade you from recognizing our shared humanity. We can talk about the pandemic now, because I think it's very relevant. But let me ask you a question, Mickey.
Yes.
When you watched Don't Look Up,
yeah,
what do you think the message of it was in terms of its parallels to anything going on in the world, if any?
Well, I think it's pretty much what I said. The idea that we live in a polarized society, that no matter what the issue, people will split into the two camps. And it's funny because sometimes you even watch people like linger on at the beginning of an issue to figure out what their group thinks. Like, what is the opinion we're supposed to take on this, you know? Like, it used to be that, the classical Democrats in the United States discouraged people from wearing masks. I remember I was in the US, it was on CNN all the time that masks don't work and that people shouldn't wear them. That people who wear them are crazy. And I don't know, I think that was the core message of the movie, that people will split over anything.
Right.
What do you think was the message?
I don't know. It's like the Wikipedia synopsis says that it's a cautionary tale, a black comedy about global warming. But it's equally about the pandemic. It's equally about manipulation and ignorance. We can find many parallels to it.
You said that you recognize how the big tech and social media we all spend a lot of time on has shaped our society and maybe changed it to worse, right? We are more isolated. We create those echo chambers. Do you have any idea on how to fix this? Because I thought about it a lot and I have not come up with anything. And when I met with people who tell you about, the craziest conspiracy theories and how Bill Gates is the biggest asshole because those were completely healthy girls and he sterilized them with vaccines, I just have no idea what to do with it, like.
It's tough, but I think the best idea that I've heard was suggested by a student of mine at NYU. Jonathan Bujak wrote a term paper in our philosophy of law class in which he proposed a filter tax. So we can appreciate that the algorithms that are used for purposes of e-commerce and clickbait in order to profit off people prevent us from getting balanced or shared information on things. Mm-hmm. And so he said that filtering is what they call in economics an externality. It is a social cost imposed by the business practices which derive private gain.
And by filtering, you mean deliberately feeding just one opinion to a person? Or like one side of the debate?
No. You know what Facebook and Google and their kin do. They data mine you. They have a profile developed of you. And so
of course. But what part of it is the filtering?
The filtering is what you get. You get a mirror effect.
Oh, so like
they
the feed.
Look at you and then they feed you what you like.
Okay, I see.
And so in doing that, they're imposing a cost on society because, to pivot a little bit, free speech and freedom of information is thought to serve the interests of society because it allows rational debate. This is the town square model of free speech.
Yeah.
Everybody's working from a common set of facts, and through disagreement and debate, people somehow, because they are rational and well-intentioned, can listen to it all and figure out what makes the most sense. But what you have, thanks to filtering, is people living in parallel universes. They have no common set of facts. They have no common information. So this makes free speech in service of democracy dysfunctional. You cannot have rational debate to allow optimal outcomes.
Okay, so you fix it by doing what exactly?
You impose a tax on Facebook and Google in order to give back to society.
I see, but you would have to quantify that filter effect, right? Because otherwise there's just gonna other companies spring up that will just take their place. Like, it's not only Facebook that's doing this or Google. There's thousands and thousands of companies who have algorithms.
Every digital platform uses filtering.
Right. And so you need to somehow quantify to what extent they're doing this so you could tax them, right? Because you probably wouldn't want, like, would you tax the whole revenue of Google? And what if, like, some company only owns, a small portion of their company is an actual filtering website and the other part is totally unrelated? You need to somehow figure out. Also, there's filtering to different degrees, For example, on Reddit, you assemble your feed. You have to actively go out, look for subreddits that you want to follow, and you assemble your own filter. So is that like really the company doing it? Because that's like, what if you have media with a natural bias? Just the opinion of people writing it. It's not something that they're trying to do. Every media does that. Will you measure that somehow? It's a very problematic thing. I don't think you can just say we will tax them. And
Agreed.
It's a very hard problem to solve.
Agreed. I think we need to rethink the whole legal framework of big tech. I think that as it stands now, we have to recognize, firstly, that most people get their news and information through social media. And so tech companies are media companies and therefore should be held to a higher standard. And so big tech has been able to proclaim themselves technology companies in order to avoid having the standards imposed on media companies imposed upon them. Mm-hmm. That needs to change.
I think the problem is that the high standards imposed on media companies are no more.
Are what?
No more. The separation of church and state, or whatever they used to call it. Like, in every decent journal, they had very distinct departments that were doing the content and that were doing the financing and the advertising, so you wouldn't be influenced by advertisers. That's gone. They don't do that anymore. They call it natural content or something like that.
It's merged content.
Yeah.
So
a company pays you to make an article about them, which is very problematic.
Right.
And
sponsored content.
I think generally the good practices you're talking about are mostly gone. They used to be there, and now because of social media, a lot of new players entered the game who were not held to such a high standard because they were small and nobody cared about them. It got even the big players to lower their standards.
No doubt e-commerce has killed the standards of reporting that used to apply. Traditional media is no more.
So then what is our solution? Because as we said, like, you could hold media to a higher standard again, but it's very difficult to do that. You know, like how do you even approach that? It's like, you're not gonna read bad articles or what? Like, I honestly, like, I'm not too well versed in media awareness, but I don't know of like a media outlet that I would now consider like really like prestigious, that they held their standards. You know, I don't think the New York Times managed to. I don't think the Guardian managed to. I think, you know, I just lost the sense that they are holding up their standard. Is there a medium you think that persuaded in keeping those standards?
Well, I'd like to think that academic publishing publishers and peer-reviewed journals are still driven by truth value and accuracy. But, you know, it's quite possible that as they've migrated online, that they've been polluted as well. So there's a rot at the heart of our information ecosystem. And even if you want to talk about scientific peer-reviewed journals, it's like, how many people read those journals? What's their reach?
Yeah, I don't even read those journals. It's a very difficult reading. You know what I mean? I usually just read someone who is...
Can I ask you a personal question?
Yes, absolutely.
Are you vaccinated?
Absolutely, yes.
Have you been boosted?
Not yet, no.
Do you intend to?
I think so, yeah.
Why?
Why do I intend to get a boost?
Why did you get vaccinated? Why do you intend to get boosted?
Well, I didn't do that much research. I will be completely honest with you. I watched my camp pick an opinion, and then I comfortably slid into it. And yeah, like, generally I'm a big fan of vaccines. I think they're a good way to train your immunity system, right? So you get your immunity. It's like a workout for your immunity when you're not actually sick, so you're not actually getting hurt. That's how I take it. And
okay, why are you a fan of vaccines?
Well, that's what I'm talking about. I think it's a good way to make your immunity work without there being an actual emergency. Yeah. So, and then regarding this COVID vaccine, I didn't do much research. My father did. He's very into reading stuff about new. He's just well informed, and I trusted his opinion. So when he told me to get Pfizer, I got Pfizer.
Who was well informed?
My father.
Oh,
yeah.
Okay, right.
So I actually think that it is a bit of an underrated way to approach stuff sometimes. People are always like, you have to think for yourself, you can't be a sheep. But I think that sometimes to just yield your opinion to someone else who you think is well informed can be a good way to make decisions. Because you can't always be an expert in everything. You can't always make a research into every single decision you do. So I think that sometimes it's good to just yield and let someone else decide it for me, whether it be like some real expert or just someone you trust in this matter.
How do you know who to trust?
How do I know who to trust? Yeah, that's do you know how the Google PageRank algorithm works?
Only Google knows.
No, of course, like they have perfected it, but the very basic algorithm is widely known for many, many years. They just have fine-tuned it amazingly. But
known by search engine optimization analysts.
Yeah, but also it's not that. Yeah, basically, what they do is you look at the literal web of, it's a graph of websites that link to one another, and you're trying to figure out which one are trustworthy. And the way you do it is that you look at you assign some very basic trustworthiness to every website, and then based on what websites link to every website, you refine the trustworthiness. So if a lot of small websites are linking to a website, then it's probably trustworthy. But also if like some very trustworthy website links.
Are you implying that Google's algorithm of its search results is based on the trustworthiness of the platforms?
Well, that's what they're trying to do, and I assign trustworthiness in a similar manner. So you start out with basically not a lot of idea of what is and what isn't trustworthy, but then stuff kind of reinforces itself with exchanging mutual trust. And
it sounds like a circle jerk to me.
Oh, absolutely.
Because what we're doing is conflating trust with profit, with doing business.
I see. Well, not necessarily, but partly, yeah. Like it can those two can get mixed up. But like if you're talking about people, it's usually, as I said, like if it's someone who has proved to be right a lot in the past, you will trust them, like my father. If it's someone who is trusted by someone who you trust them, even if you don't have that much personal experience with them, right? So if you have someone who...
Okay, yeah, I think we covered this ground that when you're talking about an authority figure that you don't personally know, then you concern yourself with not only their qualifications on the subject matter, but also their reputation for integrity over time, consistency, and...
I don't think consistency is necessarily the greatest indicator of...
open-mindedness matters.
Yeah.
But somebody who's an opportunist is all over the place. And so, yes, consistency has its limits, absolutely. In this discussion, I'm reminded of something else that I think is important in order to create a better media or information landscape, and that has to do with fair competition. When you're talking about Google's algorithm, I think you need to make it transparent. I think you need fair competition for innovation to happen. I also think that fair competition demands that we break up big tech.
Okay, but if you say
Too much power is bad.
okay,
Remember,
kind
power
of-
corrupts.
Yeah.
Absolute power corrupts. Absolutely.
let's get into the part where you want to make Google's algorithm public, because
There's
right-
precedent for it.
of course, yeah, but can you talk about that precedent?
Yeah, sure. Microsoft.
Microsoft's
Microsoft's operating system for Windows.
not open source.
Was it?
Windows is not open source, right?
In 1998, Microsoft was required as part of a settlement in U.S. District Court and also in the EU to disclose their source code for Windows in order to promote fair competition.
Oh, really? Interesting. I did not know that. But yeah, the thing is that for Google, the intellectual property is big part of the value of the company, right?
Absolutely.
So I understand that it's gonna be very hard for an American legislator to make them publicly disclose to all foreign companies basically their all intellectual property, and therefore basically distribute their net worth to both domestic and foreign actors, right? That's gonna be hard to sell to.
It's necessary. The book I would recommend is The Master Switch by Tim Wu, W.U., Columbia Law professor, who writes about the history of competition and innovation and intellectual property. He talks about AT&T, he talks about Microsoft, he talks about Standard Oil, and basically what he argues, I think persuasively, is that there is a period when the innovator is benefiting society and reaping great reward for doing that. But there comes a point where they have too much market control, so that their interest is primarily in inhibiting innovation and competition in order to protect their turf. And this is the point that I think that the tech giants are at. I think the problem is that they have too much wealth and they control the politics because of their wealth. And so if you look at the Senate Antitrust Committee's questioning of Eric Schmidt, the CEO of Google, it's laughable because he's in their pockets. And so they're not really interested in controlling him. They're interested in continuing to do business with him and gaining favor with him.
I see. And a lot of the times it's not even illegal, because the company can very legally just make a contribution to the campaign, and then that's a very legal thing for a company to do, contribute to someone's campaign. And then
with transparency and limits on the amount that they can give. The book I would recommend on the border between legal and illegality with the use of money in politics is Dark Money by Jane Meyer. She documents very nicely the way that the law has enabled money to flow without the public being able to know where it comes from due to the political action committees that filter the money.
I think
Can I ask you a question?
Of course, yeah.
I'm interested, I think before we got started, you asked me how my holiday was, and I told you how nice it is for me to spend time with my kids and their wonderful partners. And I'm really interested in the young people transforming the way business is done and the way decisions are made in society. Talk to me about what you hope to do in the coming years, what your classmates from Kepler hope to do, your sense of what motivates young people today, and their reaction to the incentives and priorities and lifestyles of their parents' generation.
Reactions to how they react to their parents, the way their parents chose to live.
Well, what your ambitions are and what you want to model or change from what you see in your parents.
Yeah, so my dad, he is a very productive person.
He's very what?
Productive. So I quite admire that. And I think in general he has very good soft skills and leadership skills. So that's something I'm definitely trying to model. He is quite anxious. So that's the reason he never really liked being an entrepreneur. He tried for a bit and then decided that he is way more satisfied with being an employee and someone who can rely on their paycheck. And that's something I would like to, potentially even surpass him in. I really think that entrepreneurship is an important part of human endeavor. So I would love to one day own my own business. I think it's
How does your podcasting potentially fit in with your entrepreneurship?
I try not to think about it as an activity that might make me money, because then it would just might disappoint me. Even I would say probably or surely. When I release this episode, I don't want to be, disappointed that not too many people listen to it. I want to be glad that some people did. I take it as a hobby, and I intentionally chose a hobby that has a potential of making money, because I think it's a good way to choose hobbies. But it's still a hobby, and I don't do it because I hope I will make money by doing it one day. I just think it's a good hobby. The real reason I'm doing it really is so that there is a big enough data set so that if I suddenly die, it's going to be possible for an AI algorithm once to simulate me and replace that hole that will be left in my relative's heart, with like a
So there would be a Mickey cyborg that would...
Not cyborg, it's more like a simulation, but you couldn't really tell it apart from me, so it would be like a digital version of me, my voice, I don't take video, so no video, sorry Mom.
Yeah, you got a nice voice. That's a nice thing to leave behind for
but also,
people you love.
Also, I take it a bit as like documentation effort, archival. It's like a lot of nice people I want to put into something that will last, like maybe my grandfather, he recently passed.
Oh, I'm sorry.
And
how old was he?
I don't know. I just don't know. I think 78 maybe. I don't really no idea. But I was very sad. I've always wanted to have him on like a podcast, but I didn't have a podcast at the time.
Yeah.
So
it's a lovely thing to do. My mother interviewed her father when he was in his 90s, and I'm really glad she did that. It was very nice for us to have.
Yeah, so it kind of pushed me to finally make that step, because, it's the clock is ticking, and you never know when you're gonna have the last opportunity to make something like this happen with someone. It's also quite enjoyable activity. I really enjoy those moments when you sit down and just talk for, a considerable amount of time with someone who you maybe don't know that well. And I realized that as I stopped doing the things children do, like go to summer camps and school trips, those moments became rarer and rarer, because when are you gonna sit down with a stranger for an hour and have like meaningful conversation about something important, not a small talk and telling.
Is social life for young people normalizing?
What do you mean by normalizing?
Going back to starting to replicate pre-pandemic connectivity.
I see. I think it will never quite be the same. But even like I'm a bit afraid to admit it, but even when regulations forbade it, we always hang out at least a bit. Like maybe during the first like very hardcore quarantine when I came back from the US, there was like a couple months when I literally saw no one. But then we hung out on Discord quite a bit. We played an online game together, so that was like a nice activity. I quit gaming before that, so I came back because I thought, it's a good way to spend time with my friends when we can't see each other. But then we smaller groups, 4 people meet.
Yeah, no, I just feel concerned for young people because being social is so important, and it's quite a challenging circumstance to come of age now, and it forces innovation to figure out new ways to feel connected to people, and so good luck with that. It's necessary in order to maintain your Ubuntu.
Yeah, I luckily don't have to maintain Ubuntu anymore because I switched to NixOS.
You switched to what?
NixOS. It's a different variant of Linux. You know that Ubuntu is also a Linux distribution.
No. So I'm not a real tech person, so you can educate me on the terminology.
It's an operating system as well, but the operating system is named after the African word. So,
okay.
Yeah.
Branding.
How are you dealing with the pandemic? Are you doing good, like on mental health? Yeah,
I've been fortunate. I've been able to continue my work, my teaching, my legal work. I've been able to maintain about a 80 to 90% workload, and I have been able to maintain a nice combination of online and in-person teaching. Mm-hmm. And so, it's hard because there's people that I love that I want to travel to see, and traveling is hard now. I'm really looking forward to being able to travel more freely. And
to the U.S. Did you used to come very often to the U.S.?
Oh, we would try to make it every summer to see my mother and brother.
Do they live in the Bay Area?
No, they're in New York. So I went with my daughter in August, and we spent some time there, and that was really nice. We were supposed to go the previous August, but couldn't due to the pandemic. And my mom is 86 years old, so time is ticking, as you said, and we just needed to have some time together. So it was good to be able to do that.
I was once, these days I eat. I cook a lot. I live in the Netherlands. I cook most meals I eat. And I usually don't have a lot of plans. So whenever I make a meal, it's unique. Once I was finishing the very last bowl of a meal I made, and it hit me that I quite like that meal and I'm never going to have it again, Yeah. So I had a very... It was a very meaningful meal for me. Well, it was almost because I was aware that it's something I'm doing for the last time.
Yeah. They're in lockdown in the Netherlands now, aren't they?
Yeah, well, for me, it didn't make such big difference because when I went to, I didn't go to school that much anyway, because we don't have lectures. We have pre-recorded videos, which is amazing, by the way. I think it's an objectively superior way to learn because you can play the lectures at twice the speed and then pause them when the difficult part comes. Think about it, try it out, then continue.
Tell me about your program of studies that you're in there.
I see. I studied the history of makeup art.
History of what?
Of makeup art.
Oh, interesting.
I'm kidding. It's applied mathematics and technical computer science. And yeah, it's quite nice.
What institution?
University of Twente.
Great.
You ever heard about it? You moving back in,
but I don't know many European universities. When you were talking about making a meal, one of the definitely the most moving scene in that film, Don't Look Up to Me, was when they sit down to make a last meal as the meteor is heading towards the Earth, and knowing that the clock is ticking, and enjoying making a meal together and sharing food around a table. What was it? A group of about 6 or 7 people, maybe, around that table. Mm-hmm. Enjoying food and appreciating it with people. Or even alone, if you have the proper Buddhist mindset of appreciating everything that went into producing the food that you're enjoying.
Yeah, I would say I have a Buddhist mindset. I meditate quite a bit.
Yeah, great.
Yeah. Last meal is a very interesting concept. I was now watching like a documentary about insanity and execution in the United States mostly.
Yeah.
And how in the United States they tend to give out the death sentence to the most horrendous crimes, who are usually committed by the people who are the most insane. So it leads to quite a paradox where like people who have no idea what's going on are getting executed. And there was like this example of a guy who was used to leaving his dessert for like later. He wouldn't eat it immediately after dinner. And during his last dinner, he saved the dessert after the execution.
Yeah, the whole idea of insanity in criminal law is interesting because it's the desire of society to say that somebody who does something so terrible has to be mentally ill. Mm-hmm. And so it's an interesting issue.
I would say it's the desire of certain professionals and academics to say that, but I would say it's the desire of a lot of people in the society, especially in the American society, to say that you must be fundamentally evil if you commit such acts.
The gun laws don't help.
What's your stance on gun laws?
I understand that the right to bear arms is philosophically a noble idea in order to prevent individuals and communities to fight against the slide towards tyranny of the state.
Yeah.
It's the ultimate check. If the state has a monopoly on the use of firearms, then there's nothing to preserve liberty or freedom. But in practice, I think there are. I think that in practice, we need strict gun laws. I don't think that there should be right of individuals to have guns on the scale that they are. Certainly not automatic weapons and military machine guns and things. This is insane. We're not talking about hunting. We're talking about weapons that are made for massacring people.
Well, to be completely fair, the vast majority of people who own those weapons don't have them to massacre people. They have them for fun, because shooting weapons is fun, right? And
I've never shot a weapon.
Never?
How does it make you feel to shoot a weapon?
It's fun. It makes you feel like, damn, that's fun. At least me.
Okay.
Yeah. It makes you also feel powerful.
Also makes you feel what?
Powerful.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, let's find our power in better ways.
Right? Yeah, like, I get what you mean. The problem is...
It's just funny to me that you meditate and you enjoy shooting guns.
How so? Yeah, it's funny to me that you have never shot a gun.
Yeah, I know.
Yet. You make fun of me of enjoying it.
I'm not making fun. I'm just pointing out the interesting nature of existence.
Meditation while shooting a gun, that's one of the things I need to put into my to-do list. I want to do that before I go.
So I want to thank you for inviting me to talk with you. It's lovely to share ideas with you.
Wow, you listened to the very end. There are so many projects competing for your attention, and you decided to spend your valuable time listening to my voice. Thank you! If you would like to support me and my voice, please consider sharing it with someone you think might enjoy it. You can discuss this episode with me and other listeners of my voice on my subreddit. The link is in the link tree in the description of the podcast. See you there!